The most terrifying number Emily Carter had ever seen was not a bill, a debt, or a salary. It was $47.18 glowing on an ATM screen at 11:47 p.m. in a nearly empty hospital parking lot. For a few seconds, she just stood there in her wrinkled office blouse, one hand gripping her debit card, the other holding a paper folder filled with estimates she could not afford to read again. Her mother needed a procedure by morning. The hospital had been polite, painfully polite, the way people sound when they are telling you that love is not a payment method. Emily had worked since she was 18. She had skipped vacations, bought groceries with coupons, driven the same used car for almost a decade, and still her entire life had somehow been reduced to $47.18. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. For one hopeful second, she thought it might be the payroll department, or maybe a message from the hospital saying there had been a mistake. Instead, it was a calendar reminder from Blake Capital, strategy presentation, 8 a.m., conference room A, Jonathan Blake attending. Emily almost laughed, but the sound got stuck in her throat. Tomorrow morning, she was supposed to stand in front of executives in a glass-walled boardroom and explain how to manage money for a company worth millions, while her own checking account could barely cover a tank of gas. Jonathan Blake would be there, sitting at the head of the table in a navy suit that probably cost more than her rent. He had a way of looking at people like he already knew the price tag on their confidence. Last week, when Emily had quietly asked HR about an emergency salary advance, Jonathan overheard it near the elevator. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply looked at her and said, "Some people build wealth, Miss Carter. Others spend their lives asking for permission to survive." The words had followed her everywhere since then, through the fluorescent office halls, through the grocery store aisle where she put items back because the total was too high, through the hospital room where her mother smiled and pretended not to be scared. Emily pulled the receipt from the ATM and stared at the balance again, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves out of mercy. They did not. A cold wind moved across the parking lot, lifting the corners of the hospital bills in her folder. She pressed them against her chest and walked back toward the entrance, each step heavier than the last. Inside, the vending machines hummed, the lights were too bright, and somewhere down the hall, a nurse laughed softly at something ordinary. Emily stopped outside her mother's room and wiped her face before going in. She refused to let her mother see that money had cornered her. But when she pushed the door open, she saw a worn brown notebook on the chair beside the bed, tied with an old rubber band. On the cover, in her mother's handwriting, were 5 words Emily had never seen before: "Make money work for you." Emily did not open the notebook right away. For almost a minute, she stood beside the hospital bed and watched her mother sleep under the thin white blanket, her breathing steady but tired, her silver hair spread across the pillow like a memory from a softer life. The room smelled faintly of hand sanitizer, coffee, and the kind of fear no one says out loud. Emily placed the folder of bills on the windowsill and picked up the notebook with both hands, as if it might fall apart from being touched. The cover was worn at the corners. A few pages were bent. Inside, the handwriting was careful, simple, and familiar. There were no dramatic secrets at first, no hidden bank account, no miracle answer. Just lists: rent, groceries, gas, church donations, medicine. A few names Emily recognized from their old neighborhood in Ohio. Beside each name was a note in her mother's handwriting: helped reduce debt, helped start savings jar, helped negotiate payment plan, helped buy first certificate of deposit. Emily frowned. Her mother had never worked in finance. She had cleaned houses, packed lunches, clipped coupons, and stretched every dollar until it felt almost impossible that it had ever been just $1. Yet page after page showed that she had quietly taught other people how to breathe again when money had them trapped. At the bottom of one page, Emily found a sentence underlined twice: "Poor is not a person. Poor is a system that was never explained." She read it 3 times. Then she sat down in the chair and felt something shift inside her. Not hope exactly, but a crack in the wall where hopelessness had been standing. By 5:30 a.m., Emily was still awake. She had not solved her mother's medical bill. She had not changed the number in her bank account. But she had filled 3 pages of her own notes, writing down every pattern she saw in her mother's system. Every dollar needed a job. Every expense needed a reason. Every emergency needed a wall built before the storm arrived. At 6:15, she washed her face in the hospital restroom, smoothed her blouse beneath her coat, and drove 23 miles through gray morning traffic toward Blake Capital. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, but her hands were steady on the wheel. When she entered the office, the lobby was already shining with polished marble, fresh flowers, and people carrying coffees that cost more than her breakfast. On the 42nd floor, conference room, waited behind glass doors. Jonathan Blake was already there, seated at the head of the table, tapping one finger against a silver pen. His suit was perfect. His smile was not. Emily took her place near the screen and opened her laptop. Jonathan looked at the small hospital bracelet still around her wrist and raised one eyebrow. "Miss Carter," he said, "let us hope your presentation is more stable than your personal finances." A few people looked down at their papers. No one defended her. Emily felt the old shame rise in her chest, hot and familiar, but this time it did not take control. She glanced at the first slide, then at the notes she had written from her mother's notebook. For the first time in her life, she understood that Jonathan was not just a man with money. He was a man who used money as a mirror, hoping everyone poorer than him would hate their own reflection. Emily inhaled slowly, clicked to the opening slide, and said, "Actually, Mr. Blake, this presentation begins with the one thing most wealthy people understand and most working people are never taught." Emily clicked to the next slide, and the screen behind her showed a simple image, $1 bill divided into 3 boxes. The room seemed disappointed. They had expected charts, market forecasts, complicated terms, something polished enough to hide behind. Jonathan leaned back in his chair with a faint smile, already preparing to enjoy her failure. Emily could feel every executive watching her, waiting for the tired young analyst with a hospital bracelet to prove she did not belong. But instead of apologizing, she began with her mother. She told them about a woman who never had a corner office, never wore designer suits, never flew first class, and still managed to keep families from drowning when their paychecks disappeared too quickly. She did not say her mother was in a hospital bed 3 miles away. She did not mention the $47.18. She simply said, "The first financial mistake most people make is believing money only has value after there is a lot of it." A few faces changed. Not softened, exactly, but focused. Emily clicked again. The slide showed 3 words: survival, protection, growth. She explained that every dollar without a purpose becomes someone else's profit. A dollar left unassigned becomes takeout, late fees, panic purchases, and used subscriptions, and interest paid to institutions that count on confusion. But a dollar given a role becomes the beginning of control. Survival money keeps the lights on. Protection money builds a wall between one emergency and total collapse. Growth money is the seed that eventually works when the person is too tired to keep trading hours for dollars. Jonathan gave a quiet laugh. "That sounds charming, Miss Carter," he said, "but this is not a community class at a public library. This is a capital strategy meeting." Emily looked at him, and for the first time, his interruption did not shrink her. It sharpened her. "You are right, Mr. Blake," she said. "So let us talk about capital." She clicked again, and the screen filled with data from thousands of small customer accounts the company had ignored for years. People earning between $40,000 and $70,000 a year. People with steady jobs, no wealth strategy, high stress, and no tools built for them. Blake Capital had always chased the already wealthy because it was easier to sell confidence to people who had never lost it. But Emily had found a different market, a larger one, a market full of Americans who were not broke because they lacked character, but because no one had ever taught them how to turn wages into a system. The room grew quieter. Even the senior vice president stopped checking his phone. Emily moved through the numbers with a calm she did not recognize in herself. She showed how small automated savings, debt prioritization, emergency buffers, and beginner investment education could be packaged into a low-cost digital product for working families. Not charity, not pity, a profitable tool built around dignity. Jonathan's smile faded by a fraction. Emily saw it. Everyone saw it. Then she opened the final slide of that section, a scanned page from her mother's notebook, with one sentence typed clearly beneath it. "Poor is not a person. Poor is a system that was never explained." For 3 full seconds, nobody spoke. Emily realized the silence was not empty. It was the sound of a locked door beginning to open. The silence lasted long enough for Emily to hear the soft hum of the conference room lights. Then Jonathan Blake closed his pen with a sharp click and leaned forward. "It was an interesting story," he said, "but stories do not build revenue." Emily felt the room tilt toward him because that was what rooms did when money spoke with confidence. But before she could answer, Dana Whitmore, the chief operating officer, looked at the screen and asked one question Jonathan clearly did not expect. How much would it cost to test this with one small user group? Emily had the number ready. Not because she was brilliant, not because she had slept, but because fear had forced her to become precise. $12,000 for a pilot program, she said. 6 weeks. 500 working customers. Automated budget mapping, debt priority alerts, emergency fund goals, and beginner education written in plain English. Jonathan almost smiled again, but this time it looked tighter. "And you believe people struggling with money will pay for financial guidance?" Emily looked at the faces around the table, then thought of the vending machine outside her mother's hospital room, where a sandwich cost $7.99, and people still bought it because hunger did not wait for a better option. "People pay for confusion every day," she said. "Late fees, overdraft fees, credit card interest, bad loans, panic decisions. I am suggesting we offer clarity for less than the cost of one restaurant lunch." No one laughed. Dana wrote something down. Another executive asked for the customer segment breakdown. A third asked whether the company already had the software infrastructure. For the next 15 minutes, Emily was no longer the young analyst with a personal crisis. She was the only person in the room who had seen a market hidden in plain sight. But Jonathan was not finished. When the meeting ended, he waited until the others had left before stepping beside her at the glass wall overlooking downtown. The city below looked expensive and untouchable, a grid of cars, towers, and people racing toward bills they had not yet received. "You surprised them," he said. Emily packed her laptop without looking at him. That was the goal. Jonathan lowered his voice, smooth and controlled. "Be careful, Miss Carter. A good idea can still collapse in the hands of someone emotional." Emily paused. Yesterday, that sentence would have found the weakest place in her and pressed down. Today, it sounded almost useful. "Emotional people are not the problem," she said. "Panic systems are." His expression changed just slightly, but she was already walking away. By noon, Emily was back at the hospital, sitting beside her mother with the old notebook open across her knees. The procedure had been scheduled, but the payment plan was still uncertain, and every time her phone buzzed, her stomach tightened. She wanted to check her bank account again, wanted to stare at the same painful number as if worry could add to it. Instead, she opened a blank page and drew 3 columns the way her mother had done: survive, protect, grow. Under survive, she wrote rent, gas, groceries, hospital parking, minimum payments. Under protect, she wrote emergency fund, insurance questions, payment plan, no new debt without purpose. Under grow, her hand hesitated. She had always thought growth belonged to people with extra money, people who could afford to take chances. Then she wrote 3 words: skills, product, ownership. That was the first time Emily understood the difference between being broke and being powerless. Broke was a number. Powerless was having no system. Her mother stirred and opened her eyes. "You found it," she whispered. Emily looked down at the notebook. "Why did you never tell me?" Her mother gave a tired smile. "Because I was still learning too." Emily swallowed the ache in her throat and turned another page. There, beneath a list of names from their old neighborhood, her mother had written a rule that felt like it had been waiting years to reach her. Money runs from panic, but it returns to a plan. For the next 6 weeks, Emily lived by a rule her mother had written in blue ink years ago: never let a dollar leave without instructions. She did not suddenly become fearless. She still sat in her car outside the hospital some mornings counting what was left for gas. She still packed peanut butter sandwiches because the cafeteria coffee alone felt like a luxury. She still woke up before sunrise with the heavy thought that one emergency could erase every careful plan. But now, each fear had a column, each bill had a place, and each small decision had a purpose. At night, after visiting her mother, Emily sat at the tiny kitchen table in her apartment and turned the notebook system into a simple digital worksheet. She made it clean, plain, and human. No confusing finance language. No shame. No lectures. Just 3 boxes: survive, protect, grow. The first version was ugly, slow, and held together by formulas she had learned from free online tutorials. But when she sent it to 2 co-workers who had quietly asked about her presentation, both of them replied before midnight. One said she had finally understood why her paycheck disappeared every 2 weeks. The other said she had canceled 3 subscriptions and moved $25 into savings for the first time in months. Emily stared at those messages for a long time. $25 would not impress Jonathan Blake. It would not make headlines. But to someone who had never had a wall between herself and panic, $25 was not small. It was proof. By the end of the week, 11 people were using the worksheet. By the end of the next week, 38. One Friday night, while Emily was asleep in the vinyl chair beside her mother's hospital bed, her phone lit up with a payment notification. Then another. Then another. She had added a $5 option for people who wanted the upgraded version, expecting nothing. By morning, she had earned $115 while she slept. Emily held the phone in both hands, barely breathing. It was not the amount that shook her. It was the meaning. For the first time in her life, money had arrived without her standing at a register, answering emails, sitting in traffic, or asking permission from a manager who thought her exhaustion was normal. A small system had worked while she rested. Her mother woke to find Emily crying silently, but this time it was not fear. What happened? Her mother asked. Emily turned the screen toward her. I think one of my dollars brought friends back, she whispered. Her mother smiled, weak but proud. Then give them jobs too. That sentence became a spark. Emily spent every spare hour improving the worksheet into something bigger: short lessons, automatic reminders, debt payoff order, emergency fund targets, and a page that translated every financial choice into plain language. She called it the 3-box method inside her files, never imagining anyone outside her circle would care. But people did care. Nurses shared it. Receptionists shared it. A bus driver from Cleveland sent a message saying he had used it to stop overdrafting for the first time in a year. A single father from Indianapolis wrote that he finally knew which bill to attack first. Each message felt like another light switching on in a neighborhood Jonathan Blake had never bothered to enter. Then, on a Monday morning, Emily arrived at work and found an invitation waiting in her inbox. Private meeting with Jonathan Blake, 11 o'clock. No details. No explanation. Just her name, his office, and a time. Emily looked at the message, then at the growing list of people using her system, and for the first time, she understood that if Jonathan wanted to speak privately, it was not because he thought her idea was weak. It was because he finally knew it was valuable. Jonathan Blake's office did not feel like a workplace. It felt like a place where people came to surrender. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, showing the city far below, and everything inside the room was quiet, expensive, and perfectly arranged. Emily stood near the door with her laptop against her chest, remembering the first time she had entered this building and believed people like Jonathan were different from her because they had mastered life. Now she saw something else. Some people did not master life. They mastered the appearance of control. Jonathan did not ask her to sit until he had looked through a folder on his desk long enough to remind her who owned the room. Then he slid a document across the polished wood. I reviewed your side project, he said. The worksheet, the user messages, the payment activity. It is simple, but simple can be profitable when packaged correctly. Emily felt her fingers tighten around her laptop. How did you get access to that? Jonathan gave a calm smile. You used company research, company time, and company customer insights during the pilot discussion. That creates a gray area. I am offering to make the gray area disappear. Emily looked at the document. The offer was clear. Blake Capital would purchase her system for $10,000, give her a modest promotion, and take full ownership of the product, the name, the user list, and all future development. $10,000. Her mother's payment plan. Her rent. Her car repair. The number touched every fearful place inside her. Jonathan knew it. That was why he had chosen it. You are tired, Miss Carter, he said, his voice almost kind. You are under pressure. Your mother needs care. You have a chance to solve your immediate problem and secure your future here. Do not confuse pride with wisdom. Emily stared at the paper, and for a moment the room disappeared. She saw the ATM screen again. $47.18. She saw the hospital hallway, the vending machine, the old notebook on her mother's chair. She saw the message from the bus driver in Cleveland who had written, "For the first time in a year, I knew what to pay first." Jonathan was not just offering money. He was asking her to sell the only system that had ever made her feel free. She looked up. "Why do you want it if it is so simple?" Jonathan's smile vanished for half a second. "Because I know how to scale simple things. And you do not." There it was. Not an insult shouted in anger, but a belief spoken like a fact. Emily was allowed to have the idea, but not the ownership. She was allowed to be useful, but not powerful. Her heart beat fast, but her voice stayed steady. "My mother once wrote that money runs from panic, but it returns to a plan." Jonathan leaned back. "Charming." Emily pushed the document gently back across the desk. "Then my plan cannot begin with selling the one thing I built out of panic." The air changed. Jonathan folded his hands. "Think carefully. Opportunities do not wait forever." Emily stood. Neither do people who finally learn their value. She left his office with no promotion, no $10,000, and no promise that tomorrow would be easier. By the time she reached her desk, an email was already waiting. Her role on the pilot program had been reassigned. Her access to the research folder had been removed. Her name had disappeared from the next presentation agenda. For one long minute, Emily could not move. The fear came back like a wave, whispering that she had made the most expensive mistake of her life. Then her phone buzzed. It was another payment notification. $5. Then another message from a stranger. "This helped me breathe again." Emily sat down, opened her mother's notebook, and wrote one sentence beneath the 3 columns. "If they can take the meeting from me, I will build the proof outside the room." The next morning, Emily learned how quiet an office could become when powerful people wanted someone to feel alone. Her chair was still there, her name was still on the employee directory, and her badge still opened the glass doors on the 42nd floor, but everything familiar had changed. Conversations stopped when she passed. Meetings were moved without her. Files she had built for weeks now asked for permission she no longer had. By lunch, a younger analyst was sitting in her old seat beside the pilot team, presenting numbers Emily had gathered, while Jonathan watched from the back of the room with a calm expression that said he had not raised his voice because he had not needed to. Emily carried her salad back to her desk and could barely taste it. Her bank account was still fragile. Her mother still had follow-up appointments. Her car made a strange sound every time she turned left. And now, the one safe thing she had, her job, felt like a floor made of thin glass. That evening, she drove home through heavy traffic with the radio off, too tired to pretend noise was comfort. The city lights blurred across her windshield. For one dangerous moment, she wondered if Jonathan had been right. Maybe ownership was a luxury. Maybe dignity was expensive. Maybe people with hospital bills did not get to keep their dreams. When she reached her apartment, she sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop, but instead of working, she stared at the screen until it went dark. Then her phone buzzed. A message appeared from a woman named Rachel in Columbus. "I used your 3 boxes tonight," the message said. "I thought I had nothing left, but I found $80 hiding in things I forgot I was paying for. I moved 20 into savings. It is small, but I feel like I can breathe." Emily read it twice. Then another message arrived. A teacher in Kansas had used the worksheet with her husband and created their first emergency fund goal. A nurse in Phoenix said she had finally stopped using her credit card for groceries because she could see what was coming before payday. A single father in Detroit sent a photo of 3 envelopes labeled rent, car, and future. By midnight, Emily had received 47 messages. 47. The same number that had haunted her at the ATM now returned as proof that something small could become something alive. She opened her mother's notebook and placed it beside her laptop. The old pages did not look like a secret anymore. They looked like instructions. Emily worked until 3 a.m., not because she was chasing applause, but because people she had never met were building walls against panic with a tool she almost sold. She added a page for medical bills, a page for irregular income, a page for people who had never invested $1 and were afraid of making a mistake. She rewrote every lesson in plain words, the way her mother would have said it at a kitchen table. The next week, she launched a basic website from her apartment, using less than $200 and every ounce of courage she had left. She called the system 3 boxes because that was all it had been in the beginning. A place to survive, a place to protect, and a place to grow. On the first day, 86 people signed up. By the third day, there were over 400. By Friday, a local personal finance blogger shared it, calling it the simplest money tool for working families she had ever seen. Emily watched the numbers rise while sitting beside her mother in the hospital recovery room. And for the first time, the future did not feel like a locked door. It felt like a room she was learning how to build. 2 weeks after 3 boxes appeared on the finance blog, Emily received an email from Dana Whitmore with the subject line, "Urgent, please read today." Emily opened it in the hospital cafeteria while her mother practiced walking with a physical therapist down the hall. The message was short. Blake Capital was holding its quarterly innovation forum that evening, and Jonathan Blake was presenting a new financial wellness product for working families. Dana had attached the agenda by accident or by conscience. Emily could not tell which. But when Emily opened it, her hands went cold. The product name was different, the colors were different, and the language sounded more corporate. But the idea was unmistakable: survival planning, emergency protection, beginner growth tools, and automated debt guidance for middle-income customers. Jonathan had not bought her system, so he had tried to rebuild it without her. For 1 minute, Emily sat completely still. Then she opened her laptop, pulled up her user dashboard, downloaded every timestamp, every original file, every payment record, every message from the people who had used the tool, and every version history from the night she built it at her kitchen table. By 6 p.m., she walked back into Blake Capital wearing the same black blazer she had worn the day Jonathan humiliated her, but she was not the same woman inside it. The auditorium on the 39th floor was filled with executives, investors, department heads, and senior managers. Jonathan stood on stage beneath a screen that read, "A new future for everyday investors." His voice was smooth, confident, almost generous. He spoke about forgotten customers, simple tools, dignity, access, and helping working Americans build financial control. Emily stood in the back and listened to him use the same pain he had once mocked as a business opportunity. Then Dana saw her and quietly motioned her forward. When Jonathan finished, the room applauded. He smiled as if the idea had been born fully formed inside his office, between the silver pen and the city view. Then Dana stood and said, "Before we move to questions, I believe Emily Carter has additional context." The room turned. Jonathan's face tightened, but only for a second. Emily walked to the front with her laptop in her hands. Her voice did not shake when she began. "This idea matters," she said, "because the people it serves are real." Then she showed the first version of the 3 boxes worksheet, dated weeks before Jonathan's proposal. She showed the hospital notes beside her mother's notebook, the first $5 payment, the message from Rachel in Columbus, the single father in Detroit, the nurse in Phoenix, and the teacher in Kansas. She showed 400 users, then 800, then over 1,000 people who had not been sold a dream, but given a simple way to stop drowning in confusion. The room was silent. Emily turned toward Jonathan. "This was never just a product," she said. "It was proof that people do not need to be shamed into discipline. They need a system simple enough to begin and strong enough to trust." For the first time since Emily had known him, Jonathan Blake had nothing ready to say. The room did not erupt. No one shouted. No one rushed to defend Jonathan. The truth entered quietly, and that made it heavier. Dana Whitmore looked from the screen to Emily, then to the other executives seated in the front row. One by one, people began to understand what had happened. Jonathan had seen the value in Emily's idea only after he had failed to own it. He had mistaken her pressure for weakness, her kindness for softness, and her need for money as proof that she would eventually give up control. But Emily stood at the front of the room with more than a presentation. She had dates, records, users, results, and the calm strength of someone who had already survived the thing others used to scare her. Dana walked onto the stage and asked Emily one simple question. "Do you own this product outside the company?" Emily looked at Jonathan before she answered. "Yes," she said. "I built it on my own time, with my own files, from my mother's notebook, and from the lives of real people who trusted me before this company did." The room stayed silent. Jonathan's face was controlled, but his power had changed shape. For years, he had used confidence like a locked door. Now Emily had brought the key in front of everyone. By the next morning, Blake Capital withdrew Jonathan's proposal. Dana called Emily into her office, not to silence her, but to offer a partnership on Emily's terms. Emily would keep ownership of 3 boxes, lead the program independently, and receive funding to expand it to thousands of working families across the country. When the offer came, Emily did not answer right away. She asked for time, then drove to the hospital with the printed contract on the passenger seat and her mother's notebook beside it. Her mother was sitting near the window, wearing a soft blue sweater, watching sunlight move across the floor. Emily placed the contract on the bed tray. "They want to help me grow it," she said. Her mother read the first page slowly, then smiled. "And what do you want?" Emily looked at the notebook, at the old handwriting, at the 3 simple boxes that had carried them from panic to possibility. "I want people to stop feeling ashamed because no one taught them," she said. "I want money to become a tool, not a threat." 1 year later, Emily no longer checked her bank account with fear in her chest. She still worked hard, but work no longer felt like a cage. 3 boxes had helped families build emergency funds, pay down debt, start small investments, and talk about money without blame. Emily was not suddenly living a perfect life, and she had not become rich overnight. But she had something more important than a number. She had control. She had choices. She had a system that worked even when life became uncertain. On the anniversary of the night, she saw $47.18 on the ATM screen. Emily opened her mother's notebook to the first page and added a final line beneath the old words. "The day you stop serving money with fear is the day money can finally begin serving your future."